It's a pleasure to be back in Ottawa. What I'm going to talk about are some of my trends, and I'll get on to lasers as problems found shortly, but the title of my talk comes from a quote actually by Art Schawlow, attributed to Art Schawlow at least, that optics was just a sleepy backwater of physics until Ted Mayman operated the first laser in 1960. Okay, here's a chart showing the global R&D spending in 2017, best estimate. This is from the R&D magazine annual survey, which is getting a bit sloppy actually, but to the Canadian GDP is $1.5 trillion, and there's about $1.5 trillion spent worldwide on R&D. You can see actually where it's spent. I'm concentrating on the market exchange rate. This is a purchasing power parity, takes into account other factors. When one looks at real money, market exchange rate is the proper thing to look at. And you can see that about 35% of the world's R&D is actually still, the spending is still in the US, but Asia is actually moving up quite quickly. Now, breaking this pie down into individual nations, you can actually see where Canada is here at about 1.7% of all this spending. The not so good news is that the Canadian overall R&D spending, which is this purple chart, is trending downwards. And the more competitive entities in R&D like Korea and Israel, you can see the numbers actually are up above 4% of GDP. The EU has got a target which it's failed to meet and is still failing to meet of about 3% of GDP being spent on R&D. I should point out that this is actually not government spending on R&D. This is total spending on R&D. And in different countries, the funding comes from business or from government or from other sources. In Canada, provincial sources, but surprisingly also in Canada, a huge amount actually from the higher education sector. That's very unusual. But you can actually see here the percentage of R&D funded by industry in countries that have very successful photonics economies like Taiwan. It is quite high. In Canada, it is a little lower than the OECD average and has dropped actually from 2005. If you look at global R&D and the company spending, you find actually that the first three companies here, Volkswagen, Samsung, and Amazon, spend more on R&D than does Canada, all Canadian spending. And in fact, Volkswagen itself spends more R&D than is done in the entire higher education sector in Canada, about 28% more. The Naylor Report, as it is known, Investing in Canada's Future, which I think is a very good first step to making a case, an important case to government for funding science in Canada, points out that Canada's dropped out of the top 30 nations for research intensity. GERD is declining, as I just showed. And the higher education section funding for R&D is in fact the highest in the G7, but that's not necessarily a healthy thing. It's really only 23% of R&D funding in Canada comes from federal sources. And that actually is very unfortunate for Canada's future. Moving on from general R&D to more commercial things, this is our SPIE's view of the photonics market. This counts all devices that are substantially photonics. And actually we believe that it's about this level, over $500 billion a year. The data comes from a number of sources, and the projections are based on economic forecasts and on judgment of the photonics growth forecasts relative to global growth. we discount the US administration's forecast of growth here. They also come from Photonics 21. But the flattening over this period is largely due actually not to a market slowdown, but to currency exchange rate fluctuations, which is, of course, the bane of any chart that plots in any particular currency. If this chart is shown in euros, for example, it looks significantly different over this period, or if it's shown in yen, it looks different too. But overall, the trend we expect to continue to go up. And one of the things that makes an impact more perhaps on politicians than numbers are jobs. And our measure of jobs actually is, at the moment, is projected to be 2.5 million jobs in photonics manufacturing in the world. Let me benchmark that for you. The US has got 12.4 million manufacturing jobs. Canada's got 1.7 million in 2016. Photonics market, optics and photonics market worldwide, we believe, has over 2 million jobs. You say, where's all this money coming from? Well, a huge amount of this, of course, is displays. Over 170 billion or so is displays. Lighting is 80 to 100 billion. Eyeglasses are actually quite large, 80 billion. And you get down into the more esoteric things that we heard about, lasers and things like that, which I'll get to more in a moment. But again, benchmarking that number of 500 billion or so in photonics market, the chip market, the worldwide semiconductor revenue in 2017 is actually taking a big bump up to about 400 billion US dollars. And that, of course, is key to the almost $2 trillion consumer electronics market. These are the drivers for photonics jobs. Our market estimate, of course, misses some employment sectors. Any market estimate that says it's about product factory sales misses retail sales, marketing, and installation and maintenance. Think, for example, about the solar and telecommunications segments where there are good jobs and a lot of revenue in installation and maintenance. And knowledge generation. Optics and photonics in academia and the many facilities that are funded for light-related science, all the astronomical telescopes, the synchrotrons, FELs, the large laser facilities, we estimate there's up to 60 billion or so spent a year on this segment, and it's not counted in that 500 billion product sector. According to the EU, the global market enabled by photonics is at least 10 trillion. The EU enabled by, okay? The EU estimate that 20 to 30% of its economy, the world's largest at the moment pre-Brexit, and 10% of the workforce depend on photonics. And this actually is the impact report from the EU's Photonics 21 earlier this year, where they've gone up to 2015, talking about a total photonics market of 447 billion euro. And they break it down into countries, and you can see actually how China, from over here in 2005, has grown to actually supply so much of that market in 2015. You can see also the annual growth rate that they estimate, and this is the chart again showing the emergence of China as a major player in the photonics market. Before I move on to lasers, let me briefly mention some of the new frontiers and disruptions we see at SPIE for the photonics market: autonomous vehicles, mixed reality, deep learning, and the brain. These are really frontiers at the moment. Intel, for example, just paid 15.3 billion for a company called Mobileye that makes cameras and vision systems for automobiles. In automobiles, you're going to have LiDAR, various LiDARs, and many of them. This is actually a LiDAR picture from one of the companies supplying LiDAR to the auto industry. And of course, the brain and AR and VR, which may or may not make its big successes in entertainment, but there are a lot of applications in the medical sector and in industry, and as you can see in design here. This was actually a talk by SPI's 2018 president, Mary Ellen Geiger, radiomics and deep learning and medical imaging for precision medicine. a huge revolution that's coming, in part because of chips, of processing power, and the cost of processing power. So from 500 odd billion a year, we drop down to the actual laser market, which is, as you can see from this, about 11 billion in 2017, of which 45% are diode lasers and 55% are non-diode. Now, let me drop back a little bit to 1964, when this article was published in the New York Times, which at that time was not publishing so much fake news, but in the article, actually, Dr. Maiman is quoted, whether he said it or not is a different matter, a solution seeking a problem. This is actually, when I met with Dr. Maiman, I had spent a day with him in his home in Vancouver in 2005. Very interesting looking back. The article mentions the CORAD 500 megawatt laser as the most powerful commercially available, and how he reduced the cost by using a die instead of an electro-optic switch. Schawlow-Townes, actually, in this particular thing that he wrote for A Century of Nature, 21 Discoveries that changed science and the world. When first working, the laser was reported in 1960. It was described as a solution looking for a problem. The origin of that quote is unknown. It may be the author of the article in the New York Times. This is Charles actually receiving the SPIE's gold medal, I think, in 2010. Now, most of my talks I managed to work in this device somehow, right? And it's not counted in our photonic market devices. But think a little bit about it. It's a photonic device. Information flows in and out via the photonics-powered internet. Information out to the user is via the photonic display. Purchasers are wooed by the screen, by the cameras, the photo taking and processing. When did you last ask what the audio quality of my smartphone is when you're thinking about buying the next generation? These are actually, this is the announcement for the iPhone 10, and 12 megapixel wide angle cameras. It's got 2 of those on the back of it. Face recognition. It's got an OLED display with quite high resolution. The rival, I think, to this is the Galaxy S8, which has got a AMO OLED display. It's got higher resolution screen. It's got a rear camera of, again, 12 megapixels and a front camera of 8 megapixels. And on this, if you look here, you see ambient light sensor, flood illuminator, infrared camera, front camera, dot projector. These are photonic devices. And the number of them, the driver, in 2016 is estimated almost 1.5 billion smartphones were sold. And the market for smartphones, according to UBS, quoted in The Economist, is about $400 billion a year. Are they smart or not is another question. Actually, people are beginning to ask about the impact on our minds. There was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal on this topic. But you would not have the smartphone without lasers. And this actually is a list of laser processes in the manufacture of the smartphone. See how many there are, how many applications of lasers in manufacturing this type of device. The key one, of course, is actually the lithography of the chips, but I'll get back to that in a moment. The lasers for semiconductor manufacturing, this is an October 2017 Yole report looking at the applications of lasers, or the amount of the revenues at the moment, about 2 billion or so, slightly less. Some of them femtosecond, picosecond, nanosecond, used in the semiconductor manufacturing. A huge application area for lasers. A more disruption or a merger with smartphones is just another topic I'm touching on in photonics. Is, again, a Wall Street Journal article, actually. This is a new camera by a company called Light that, instead of using one lens, uses this pile of lenses and uses a lot of computational power including the ability, by the way, to look at depth to alter your depth of field in what you like in your image, whether you want that or that. This is going to really revolutionize and change the imaging market, perhaps. Will computational power make precision optics obsolete? Will smartphone devices disrupt the optical instruments market? The ultra-thin planar lens is another huge question. What impact will that have on our photonics world? DARPA's SPIDER project actually, again, for obvious reasons, wanted to reduce the size and weight of optical surveillance systems, and that's another big area of active research. I said I'd get back to lithography for a moment. Now, this semiconductor revolution has changed our lives, whether for the better or not is a question old people like me can ask, but progress is due to multidisciplinary science, and light plays a key role in this. The use of laser light sources allowed the industry to stay on Moore's law, hugely economic important, and without the laser, we would not have the computing power or memory of today. Think actually for a moment that a typical smartphone you're carrying around in your pocket is 1 million times the memory and operates at about 30,000 times the speed of the computer on the Apollo 11 mission. This is the microprocessor transistor counts going along Moore's law. Some of us in the room may be old enough to remember these 8080 processors that they were proud of back then. But now you're actually looking at chips with more than 10 billion transistors in them. So you're probably carrying around in your pocket a chip that's got more transistors in it than people in the world. The lithography scaling evolution here, this is wafer size. This is actually what mercury lamps brought us up to here, about 1996, 97. There was no more progress out of lamps. So lasers were introduced. Krypton fluoride, argon fluoride, then argon fluoride immersion. In fact, the devices in the latest smartphones are certainly made using immersion technology, that ancient sort of optical technology dredged up by this extremely inventive community. And we're moving towards 13.5 nanometers extreme ultraviolet, which is based on carbon dioxide lasers and tin plasmas. I'll get back to, I'm going to go on to that in some detail, but I don't think too many experts in the laser area would have said the answer is going to be going back to carbon dioxide lasers, or in fact back here they wouldn't have said gas lasers. They're not the answer to really any of this technology. It's all going to be solid state lasers. This is a EUV scanner, currently actually a few of them in the world deployed. You can see the various bits and pieces of them. All the optics are reflective optics, and the reflectivity is only about 70%, which is a big problem in this area. One of these you won't get much change out of $100 million if you want to buy one of these, by the way. But the light sources, and we've talked a lot actually about extreme ultraviolet and so on earlier in various talks, but for this particular purpose, this is a Gigaphotons light source concept for EUV lithography. These are little droplets of tin that are shot out of some sort of tin droplet shooter, and they're hit by two lasers. They're pre-ionized using I think it's an infrared laser in picosecond pulses, and then a CO2 laser with nanosecond pulses, about 15 nanoseconds, and average power of 27 kilowatts. But that is now producing 250 watts of 13.5 nanometer light. If anyone can think of a better way to do that and do it as reliably, then there's a lot of money in it for you. This is actually from ASML presenting at our meeting in September on this topic, the history of EUV power up to 250 watts, how reliable it is basically, and this is needed for any real production application. They have a concept already for the next generation EUV tool, which has got higher numerical aperture. This is the diagram of the tool, and that's a person actually. So I don't think you'll get much change out of $200 million when you want to buy one of these. Another application, of course, that's on the rise and driving the industry and driving lasers profitably is 3D printing. As the former now CEO of GE, who are making a huge investment in this field, said, you're not going to be able to print a whole jet engine, but there are various parts of it that are going to be suitable for additive manufacturing. And they're already printing in volume these igniters for the LEAP jet engine, actually. So this is their GE's 3D center in Pittsburgh, using all these machines for, and this is one of their smaller centers, by the way. They announced last year, I think it might be one of the air shows, a machine for printing meter scale additive components for this industry. That's again that component you saw in the last one. Siemens is also, of course, in this, and that's their new metal printing facility in Sweden, and many other companies are into the game too. And interesting, I mean, this was one of the origins of 3D printing, the use for possible medical applications, but 3D printing organs in hard plastics and things like that is one thing, very useful to a surgeon who's actually looking at operating, and they can now be built from the 3D imaging from CT scanners and so on. Johnson & Johnson are working with GE on this. They're also used for implants, customized implants. I mean, they are working on, or they have actually used already, customized cranial titanium implants built using laser additive manufacturing. And 3D bioprinting, which I'm not a big believer in, actually printing organs themselves is under a lot of investigation right now where there are organ shortages. Ted Mayman in that article in 1964 said there are possibilities in medicine. At the time, actually, I think they had used the CORAD lasers to drill into a rat's skull or something like that, but they hadn't got very far. People actually started using lasers with the eye very early on, I think 1961 even, as early as that. But what key is, it's not economically viable to make any of these chips today without lasers. Sensitive laser techniques, and the chips, of course, are key to a huge amount of medicine. So it's not one doesn't necessarily think of the impact of the laser in that regard, but a lot of modern medicine is computational, and that's all enabled by lasers. Sensitive laser techniques themselves are used in vivo imaging. Lasers underpin the growing suite of techniques and acronyms for super resolution microscopy and so on. And they're ubiquitous in clinical medical instrumentation, in genome readers, flow cytometers. This, by the way, is the papers, history of papers at our BIOS conference, now up to, as you can see, almost 2,500 papers in various aspects of medical photonics. And what's two of the exciting areas at the moment, actually very exciting areas, are optogenetics, which use lasers, but our photonics, the growth of papers there. This is exciting because it may bring therapy, which is a big issue, and functional near-infrared spectroscopy, which offers the promise of wearable MRI-like information. Very interesting technologies. In vivo, you've got laser therapy is the gold standard for a very small number of conditions, particularly in ophthalmology. Laser-based diagnostics are increasingly important for the eye, skin, and non-invasive internal use. OCT, of course, is the big success story of recent years, and is continuing to move now from the eye to other parts of the medical field, other parts of the anatomy. But still the biggest winner in terms of laser applications on humans, it's cosmetics. Elective and cosmetic applications dominate the market, whether it's LASIK, hair removal, hair growth, skin resurfacing, etc. You've got this device here, which is actually a femtosecond laser for corneal work, because it cuts rather cleaner than some other techniques. And at the bottom here, you've got something you can believe in if you like, which is a laser cap you can buy with 272 lasers. I obviously have not used it successfully, but it's the grow hair. Flow cytometry. This is a very underestimated technology in medicine, and actually it was rather key to some of the recent pandemics like Ebola and things like that, understanding them. Market's growing around 5% a year. These are the two market leaders showing their latest equipments. There's up to 3 lasers in this flow cytometer. There's up to 6 lasers in this flow cytometer. And the market, as you can see, is growing rather quickly up towards in the billion range. Genome sequencing, full of photonics and lasers and detectors inside this device. And the cost actually of sequencing the genome has come down like this, much faster than Moore's law. The next, $100 possibly for reading the genome. This is the target of the NovaSeq 6000, which has got improved optics according to Illumina. And their current machines cost about 10 million or 6 million. And they've sold more than 400 of these. But again, all photonics enabled devices. This is actually, the next 2 slides are a little more of the amusing side. This is a very fine company that was recognized 2 weeks ago in the Sunday Times, not 2 weeks ago, a few weeks ago in the Sunday Times in the UK as one of the fastest growing companies, right? M-squared lasers makes very fine lasers, actually bringing laser technology into a lot of application spaces. But the faster growing company, bigger company, much fewer employees, is making a pulsed light for hair removal. So it's amusing in a way. As technologists, we love this company. We think it's great. People making the money are this company. Does it work? Is it real? Who knows? But low light therapy has got some promise. It's not well understood, but it is making money. Now, switching a little bit again, we talked already this morning times about time resolution. And this is actually following one of Paul's charts earlier. This tells you how old I was. But we're down towards attoseconds. But it's not just the actual what's happened here. There have been lots of lab research using techniques like pump probe and so on. There was a Nobel Prize for Zewald for femtochemistry. We're pushing towards, with short pulses, towards the intensity, the Schwinger limit in physics. Precision micromachining, cutting, drilling, structuring using femtosecond pulses in the automobile and semiconductor industries, cutting brittle material like the hardened glasses used in smartphones, ablating layers without damaging substructure, used in eye surgery. Actually, when I went from academia into industry, I really thought picosecond pulses were the end of the game. How smart I wasn't. Solutions to problems. I mean, I doubt Ted Maimon, even in his wildest dreams, wouldn't have thought that we would have a laser operating more than 100 million miles away. It depends where Mars is, actually. It can be 50 million miles or 100 and something million miles. But the laser in Curiosity just clocked up 500,000 shots in September, I believe. It's not green, the beam, it's infrared, but the artist has to do something, right? So, and of course it points at and analyzes interesting looking things on Mars. This is a very interesting looking one. It's actually iron and nickel. And provides a huge amount of information already about the elemental composition of rocks and soils on Mars. The SuperCam is going to have a more sophisticated laser and will add actually Raman spectroscopy. I'm going to finish fairly shortly, but before I do, in addition to the progress on the time resolution, we have frequency resolution and the optical references over the last few decades. And actually, in 2008, 3 optical clocks became more accurate than the definition of time itself. And it will take a decade or 2 decades to redefine time based on the technology provided by the photonics community today, because standards move so slowly. And of course, another huge exciting area is the new astronomy, with the ultimate in precision interferometers, if you want, with September the 14th, 2015, the 2 LIGO systems in the US detected gravitational waves. Second smaller event, third event, and a fourth event on August the 14th. And the August the 14th event actually was also detected by a third LIGO detector, the Virgo detector, which is in Italy. And there are now 4 events. Advanced LIGO by the numbers, the 4-kilometer interferometer. The degree of movement LIGO laser beams could detect in the mirrors 1/1000th of the diameter of a proton. There are hints that detection of a neutron star event may be announced shortly. On October the 3rd, of course, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded for the contributions to LIGO. And I think the community in general, and the people who got it in particular, pointed out that this really should be awarded to hundreds of people, the people who really contributed for decades patiently to make this happen. It's not over, by the way, with LISA. The next generation to be launched in 2030 is LISA, which is going to be a rather larger interferometer in space. And already the ESA has tested the optical system for this device. Extraordinary optics, lasers in space. This is the Laser Pathfinder optical bench at the University of Glasgow. Conclusion. In 2010, which was the anniversary of the first laser, Nature declined to do a special edition. They said that lasers were ubiquitous, too common. Nature was correct, insulting but correct. A glimpse at only a few applications that I've given you may give you a sense of how lasers are continuing to change our lives. It's indeed a solution to many problems, and as lasers shrink to both nano size, quantum dots and so on, and move into the zettawatt era, they will solve and raise ever more problems. Thank you. And I just want to end with a little thing from a 1967 movie that's quite famous, when Mr. Maguire advised the young graduate, plastics were the future. Today, he might say, quantum. Quantum is the future. And of course, the laser is a quantum device. Thank you. But I do think that strong AI communities should be getting together with photonics communities and really trying to exploit these technologies. I talked about deep learning there. Deep learning and imaging is a relatively low-level application of AI, but it will improve gradually. And it can revolutionize medicine, medical imaging, which is a huge field. The problem is the medical community will fight it tooth and nail, because AI should make radiologists extinct. Likewise, I think if you think about security and the huge amount of imaging that's done there in surveillance, AI can really solve the problem that the DARPA head spoke to us at one of our meetings and said, we're swimming in sensors and drowning in data. And nobody can afford to have the analysts to really interpret this stuff. Well, now AI can do that, or will be able to do that. And so there's two very simple applications really as a start. I mean, the scope of AI, which is of course based on these laser printed chips and processing, is enormous. It can also revolutionize science and should be applied more in science in clever ways. But I think we're all too busy publishing papers to really figure out and take the time to do that.
So, Eugene, again, thank you. And it's time to